Okay, so now we've removed the first row of stitching, so there's a lot more flex to this wheel. We're going to place it back onto our polishing unit at a high speed. And we're going to finish with our maxillary denture. So this is a little more real time. Once again, try not to go on the tissue bearing surface of the denture. I'm just trying to polish the leading edge of the periphery. Round off a little bit back here on the posterior border. And as I get to the frenums, I'm going to use either side of the leading edge of the wheel to get inside that little small space. Don't forget to add a little more pumice if you need to, or more water as it dries out. Okay, I'm going to turn it over. And again, I'm only trying to work on the peripheries at this point. Over the tuberosity in this area. Posterior border of the palate. And I'm trying to feather it towards the tissue by just rolling it over. You can certainly go down to low speed, but you can see now the wheel becomes much wider as it flexes out. And keep that in mind so it doesn't come in contact with the teeth. So I can get inside the palate now. Because I've removed that first row of stitching, it flexes out, not all the way through. I'm going to finish that off with a smaller wheel, but I'm getting a little bit closer. I'm trying to maximize the use of this wheel before I move it to something smaller. See if I can get inside the palate a little bit without touching the teeth. I think that's as far as I can go with this wheel, so I'm going to remove it. Set it to the side and introduce a small bristle brush, low RPM, initially mounted on high RPM, and then we're going to move into low RPM, and I'll continue with a palette. So I'm going to introduce quite a bit of pumice on the palette, and depending on the smoothness of your palette as a result of your wax up and or your trimming, this will take very little time or a lot of time. You will touch the lingual surfaces of the teeth, but try to minimize the amount of pressure that you're putting on them. I find my pumice now is getting dry and it's getting low. So I'm going to add a little more pumice. And some more water. To get this creamy consistency. And because this wheel is fairly new and I'm using it on low speed, it's got quite a bit of flex to it, so it gets inside the pallet quite a bit. And I think that's pretty much done. It doesn't take very long if you had a nice wax up and/or nice finish to your trimming. Now I'll move to the facial aspect, and again, I'm doing it at a slight angle. I'm trying to avoid pumicing the teeth, but now I'm trying to get a little closer to that concavity between the periphery roll and the lingual and the gingival rolls, pardon me. And of course, I'm getting closer and closer to the teeth. Notice I'm rotating it from every direction. It's not just one-sided here, but from here, from here, from the underside, and from the top. So all from all four sides, so to speak. A little bit on the lingual of the teeth, a little bit on top of the occlusal to eliminate a little bit of the roughness as a result of selective grinding. And using the edge of my wheel, minimize the pressure on the teeth. I'm going to try to round off a little bit interproximally. I'm constantly applying pumice because that's going to do all the work for me, not the wheel. The wheel is just a means of applying the pumice to where I want to polish. Just a once over here, make sure I don't have any further scratches. Looks good. And then once again, a little bit from the underside of the margins. Avoid putting pressure on the teeth. You're going to touch them, but avoid putting pressure. And now I'm going to do the inside, tissue-bearing side. Again, pumice should be very creamy, so to speak, and then very light pressure, ever so light, just to possibly eliminate any roughness. That's it, very little. And if all goes well, this is finished. These two are done, and we can move on to the high shine. Now, if you have difficulty getting all the scratches from inside the palate, or on the lingual side of the dentures, or possibly on the facial side, what you could do is use the felt cone. That's part of your kit. I'm gonna insert this one. I think this is the medium size. I think there's a larger one to this, but you can certainly use the small one as well. So I'll mount it on high speed initially. This is rather difficult to mount. That looks pretty okay. I just give it a little poke, and then I'll turn it down to low speed, because this creates a lot of heat on high speed. So you can get in here with the felt cone and possibly work your way through a little bit more, and obviously use the smaller one to get into proximately if you need to, okay? But I think if you had a nice wax up and a nice finish to your dentures after trimming, it eliminates the felt cone. Okay? But you can certainly use it. This becomes very useful on the lingual side of interiors, right back here, because it's very difficult to get in there with any of the small brushes. I'll do the same thing on the lower. And maybe just a little more inside this lingual concavity, although it looks pretty good. Okay. Now, before we go any further, I just want you to take note that I did not make a conscious effort to pumice the teeth themselves, with the exception of the occlusal surfaces of the teeth and possibly the incisal ledges, with the small bristle brush at low speed to eliminate any of the roughness as a result of selective grinding. Nothing on the facial side and very little on the lingual side of the teeth. Because if you pumice the facial side of the teeth, you will basically remove any of the fine anatomy that's incorporated on the tooth from the manufacturer. And it's going to look like a piece of glass. Okay? So before we move on to our high shine, what you want to do is have a thorough wash with just some water. Eliminate all the pumice from the dentures as well as your hands. Clean off your hands, because if you introduce any pumice to the high shine side, it will create scratches. So we're going to clean off our dentures, clean off our hands, and then we'll move on to the final stage of high shining the dentures.